The gunshot that split the silence of dawn 10 years ago still echoed in Jacob Garrison's dreams. But nothing could have prepared him for the sight that greeted him when he finally rode back into Greeley, Colorado on that scorching August afternoon in 1882. There, hanging on the clothesline behind the weathered ranch house he'd left behind, were 3 cotton dresses dancing in the hot prairie wind like ghosts of a life he'd never lived. Jacob pulled his dusty mare to a halt, his hand instinctively dropping to the colt at his hip. The ranch looked different yet achingly familiar. The fence he'd mended countless times had been repaired with fresh wood. Wildflowers grew in neat rows along the porch where his mother had once swept every morning before the fever took her. Someone had been living here. Someone was still living here. His jaw clenched as he dismounted slowly, boots hitting the hard, packed earth with a soft thud. 10 years he'd been gone. 10 years of running from the memory of that terrible night, when he'd been forced to draw his gun against the Dalton gang to protect his family's land. He'd killed 2 men that night, watched his father take a bullet that would leave him unable to work the ranch, and made the hardest decision of his 20-year-old life. He'd left, taking the target off his family's back, becoming a gunslinger for hire to send money home while staying far enough away that the Dalton gang's vengeance wouldn't find his doorstep. Now 30 years old, weathered by sun and hardship, Jacob had finally received word that the last of the Dalton gang had been hanged in Kansas. He could come home. He could finally come home, but those dresses told him home wasn't what he'd left behind. Jacob approached the house cautiously, noting the curtains in the windows, the swept porch, the general air of habitation. His father's letter 3 months ago had said nothing about tenants. Then again, his father's letters had grown increasingly sparse over the years. Just brief notes acknowledging the money Jacob sent and assuring him that all was well. The front door stood slightly ajar, and through it drifted the scent of fresh bread and something else, something sweet like honey and lavender. Jacob's hand rested on his gun as he climbed the 3 wooden steps, each one creaking under his weight just as they always had. "Hello." He called out, his voice rougher than he remembered it being. "Anyone home?" Silence answered him, then the sound of footsteps rushing from somewhere inside. The door swung open fully, and Jacob found himself staring at a woman unlike any he'd seen in his travels across the territories. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with hair the color of autumn wheat pulled back in a practical braid. Her dress was simple calico, faded from washing but clean and well mended. What struck him most were her eyes, wide and green as spring grass, filled with a mixture of surprise and something that looked almost like recognition. "You came," she breathed, one hand gripping the doorframe. "You actually came." Jacob's brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, miss, but I think there's been some mistake. This is my family's ranch. My father's ranch, Thomas Garrison." The woman's face went pale and she swayed slightly. Jacob reached out instinctively to steady her, but she caught herself against the door. "You're Jacob," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Jacob Garrison. That's right, and you are Lily Jensen." She studied his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Your father didn't tell you, did he? Tell me what?" Lily closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, they glistened with unshed tears. "You'd better come inside. There's something I need to show you." Jacob hesitated, then nodded. He followed her into the house, and the familiarity of it hit him like a physical blow. The same wooden table where he'd eaten breakfast every morning. The same stone fireplace where he'd sat on winter nights. But there were differences, too. Lace curtains he didn't recognize, a rocking chair by the window, books on a shelf that hadn't been there before. And in the corner, a small bed where a child lay sleeping. Jacob's breath caught. The child couldn't have been more than 4 or 5, a little girl with dark curls spread across her pillow, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. "That's Emma," Lily said softly. "Your father's daughter. Your half-sister." The world tilted. Jacob reached for the back of a chair to steady himself. "What? Your father married my mother 2 years after you left," Lily explained, her voice gentle but firm. "My mother had been widowed, struggling to make ends meet in town. Your father was lonely, unable to work the ranch as he used to. They found comfort in each other. I was 16 when they married, and Emma was born a year later." Jacob sank into the chair, his mind reeling. "Where are they now, my father, your mother?" Lily's face crumpled and she pressed a hand to her mouth. When she spoke again, her voice shook. "There was an outbreak of cholera last winter. It swept through Greeley like wildfire. Your father and my mother, they both—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The room spun. Jacob had ridden across 3 territories, thinking he was coming home to his father, imagining their reunion, the words of explanation and forgiveness he'd practiced in his head for years. And now, those words would never be spoken. "Why didn't anyone write to me?" His voice came out harsher than he intended. "They tried," Lily said quickly. "Your father wrote to your last known address in Arizona, but the letter came back. By the time we got word of where you might be, they were both too ill. It happened so fast, Jacob. 1 week they were fine, and the next—" She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I did everything I could, but I'm not a doctor. I'm barely a woman grown myself, and suddenly I had a 5-year-old sister to care for and a ranch to maintain and creditors knocking at the door." Jacob looked at her properly for the first time, seeing the exhaustion etched in the fine lines around her eyes, the way her dress hung a bit too loose on her frame, the calluses on her hands that spoke of hard labor. "You've been running this place alone." "Not completely alone. Some of the neighbors help when they can. Mr. Henderson comes by once a week to check the fences. Mrs. Torres from town brings us vegetables from her garden. But yes, mostly it's just been Emma and me." "For how long?" 6 months. 6 months. This young woman had been holding together his family's ranch, raising a child for 6 months while he'd been wandering the territories, oblivious. "The dress is on the line," he said suddenly. "That's how you make money," Lily nodded. "I take in sewing and laundry from the town. It's not much, but it keeps us fed. There's a small herd of cattle still, but I can't manage a drive alone. I've been trying to sell them off piece by piece, but it's slow going. Everyone knows I'm desperate, so they offer half what the animals are worth." Jacob stood abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the land he'd grown up on. The pastures stretched toward the mountains, golden in the late afternoon sun. This had been his father's dream, his grandfather's before that. And now it rested on the shoulders of a young woman who had no blood claim to it at all, who could have walked away at any time. "Why did you stay?" he asked without turning around. "Where would I go?" Lily's voice was steady now. "My mother married your father, which made this Emma's home as much as it was yours. And someone had to take care of her. Someone had to try to hold on to the only stability she's ever known." Jacob turned to face her. "You could have sold the place, taken the money, and started over somewhere easier." "I thought about it," she admitted. "There were offers before word got out about your father's will. His will, he left the ranch to you, Jacob. His lawyer in town has the papers. If you didn't return within 5 years of his death, it would go to Emma. Until then, I'm named as Emma's guardian and given the right to live here and work the land, but I can't sell it. Your father hoped you'd come back. He never stopped hoping." The words hit Jacob like bullets. His father had kept faith in him, had structured his will to bring his son home, even from beyond the grave. "Show me the books," Jacob said suddenly. "The ranch accounts." Lily looked surprised but nodded. She retrieved a leather-bound ledger from a drawer and handed it to him. Jacob sat at the table and opened it, running his finger down columns of numbers in his father's familiar handwriting, then the more delicate script that must be Lily's. The picture the numbers painted was dire. The ranch was bleeding money. Medical bills from his father's and her mother's final illness. Mortgage payments that Lily had struggled to make. The costs of feed and basic maintenance. Against that, the pitiful sums she earned from laundry and sewing, the occasional sale of a cow. "We're 3 months behind on the mortgage," Lily said quietly. "The bank has been patient because of the circumstances, but Mr. Thornton said he can't wait much longer. If we miss another payment, they'll foreclose." Jacob did the math in his head. He had some money saved from his years as a hired gun, but not enough to cover the debt and keep the ranch running. They'd need a cattle drive, a successful one, to get back on their feet. "How many head do we have?" "About 200 last I counted. Some have wandered off. I try to keep track, but it's a lot of territory to cover on foot." "On foot? There are no horses." "We had to sell them. Except for one old mare that's too stubborn to be worth much. She's in the barn." Jacob closed the ledger and rubbed his face with both hands. He'd come home expecting to find his father, expecting to slip back into a life he'd once known. Instead, he'd found a ghost of that life, held together by the determination of a woman who owed his family nothing. A small sound made them both turn. Emma had woken and was sitting up in her bed, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists. When she saw Jacob, she shrank back slightly. "It's all right, sweetheart," Lily said, crossing to the child and scooping her up. "This is Jacob. He's your brother. Remember I told you about him." Emma studied Jacob with eyes that were unmistakably Garrison blue, the same shade as his own, as their father's had been. She had their father's nose too, Jacob realized with a pang. "Hi there," Jacob said, his voice softening. "You're Emma." The little girl nodded shyly, burying her face in Lily's shoulder. "She's usually more talkative," Lily said with a small smile. "She's not used to strangers." "I'm not a stranger," Jacob said. "I'm family." But even as he said the words, he knew they rang hollow. He was a stranger to this child, to this life. He'd been gone so long that even the definition of his own family had changed without him. "I need to tend to my horse," Jacob said, standing. "Then we should talk, really talk, about what happens next." Lily nodded, settling Emma on her hip. "There's stew on the stove. You must be hungry after your journey." Jacob paused at the door. "Thank you, Lily, for everything you've done, for staying, for taking care of Emma, for trying to save this place." "It's my home too," she said simply. Outside, Jacob unsaddled his mare and led her into the barn, which was in better repair than he'd expected given the state of the finances. Lily had clearly prioritized what mattered. He found the old mare she'd mentioned, a gray with kind eyes who nickered softly at his approach. "Hey there, old girl," he murmured, patting her neck. "Remember me?" Of course she didn't. 10 years was a lifetime for a horse, but she accepted his touch readily enough, and Jacob found comfort in the familiar smell of hay and leather, horse and dust. He took his time with his mare, giving himself space to think. The situation was even worse than he'd imagined in his darkest moments during the ride home. His father was gone. There was a sister he'd never met, a young woman he'd never heard of living in his house, and a mortgage about to swallow everything his family had built. But there was also something unexpected. There was hope. Lily hadn't given up. Despite impossible odds, she'd fought for this place, for Emma, for a future that wasn't even guaranteed to include her. That kind of strength, that kind of loyalty was rare in his experience. When Jacob returned to the house, full darkness had fallen. Warm light glowed through the windows, and he could see Lily moving around inside. setting the table. It struck him how domestic the scene was, how much it looked like the home he'd left behind, just with different people filling the familiar roles. Inside, Emma was sitting at the table, swinging her legs and chattering to Lily about something that had happened with the chickens that morning. She fell silent when Jacob entered, watching him with cautious curiosity. "Wash up," Lily said, gesturing to the basin. "Supper's ready." They ate in awkward silence at first, broken only by Emma's occasional observations about her day. But gradually, tentatively, they began to talk. Lily told him about his father's last months, how he'd spoken often of Jacob, of his pride in his son's survival, his hope that one day they'd be reunited. "He never blamed you for leaving," Lily said. "He always said you did what you had to do to protect the family. He just wished he could have told you that himself." Jacob's throat tightened. "I should have come back sooner. I should have checked on him." "You sent money," Lily pointed out. "Every month like clockwork. Your father said that was how he knew you were all right. As long as the money came, he knew you were alive out there somewhere. The money should have been enough to keep the ranch going. It was, until the medical bills. Cholera doesn't care how much money you have. The doctor, the medicine, the quarantine supplies, it all adds up. And then there were the funeral costs." Lily's voice faltered. "I tried to keep them simple, but even simple isn't cheap." After Emma was put to bed, Jacob and Lily sat by the fire discussing the ranch's future. Jacob laid out what money he had, what he thought they could do. "We need to round up the herd and drive them to market in Denver," he said. "It's late in the season, but if we move fast, we can still make it work. A successful drive could pay off the mortgage and give us operating capital for next year." "But you can't drive 200 head alone," Lily said. "You'd need at least 3 or 4 men, and we can't afford to hire anyone. I can do most of it myself if I have to. I've worked cattle drives before." "Jacob, that's suicide. You know as well as I do that one man can't manage a herd that size across that much territory. Stampedes, river crossings, rustlers, there are too many things that could go wrong." He knew she was right, but he didn't have a better answer. They sat in silence, watching the fire burn low. "I could come with you," Lily said finally. Jacob looked at her sharply. "What? I can ride." "I can rope. Your father taught me, and I'm stronger than I look." She met his eyes steadily. "We could leave Emma with Mrs. Torres in town. She's offered before. Then it would be the 2 of us driving the herd. It's still not ideal, but it's better than you going alone. It's too dangerous." "Life is dangerous," Lily shot back. "Staying here and losing the ranch is dangerous. Letting Emma grow up with nothing is dangerous. At least this way we're fighting for something." Jacob studied her face in the firelight. There was a determination there that reminded him of his father, a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. It was probably the same quality that had kept her going these past 6 months. "You'd really do that? Risk your life for this place?" "It's not just a place," Lily said softly. "It's Emma's inheritance. It's your father's legacy. It's the home your mother built. It's worth fighting for." Something shifted in Jacob's chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. This woman, who had every reason to walk away, was willing to risk everything for a piece of land that wasn't even legally hers. "All right," he said. "We'll do it together, but we do it smart. We plan every detail, we don't take unnecessary risks, and if at any point it looks like it's going to fail, we cut our losses and get out alive." "Agreed." Lily smiled, and it transformed her face, chasing away the exhaustion and worry. "Agreed." They spent the next 3 days preparing. Jacob rode out to round up the scattered cattle, mending fences and closing gaps to create temporary holding pens. Lily went to town to arrange Emma's care, and to sell or trade anything they wouldn't need for the next month. Jacob found himself watching her as they worked. She was true to her word about being able to handle ranch work. She could rope a calf with accuracy, mend a fence line with efficiency, and she never complained about the long hours or hard labor. But it was more than that. There was something about the way she moved, the way she laughed when Emma said something funny, the way she stood on the porch in the early morning with coffee cupped in her hands, watching the sun rise over the mountains. He was starting to understand why his father had married her mother. The Jensen women clearly had pioneer stock in their blood. On the third evening, as they sat reviewing their maps and planning the route, Jacob asked the question that had been nagging at him. "Why did you really stay, Lily? The truth this time?" She looked up from the map, startled. "I told you." "You told me about Emma and the ranch, but there's more to it, isn't there?" Lily set down her pencil and folded her hands in her lap. "My mother was all I had after my father died. When she married your father, he became my family too. He was kind to me, treated me like a daughter. When Emma was born, I finally had a sister. This ranch, this life, it was the first time I felt like I truly belonged somewhere." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "When the cholera came, I watched the two people I loved most in the world die within days of each other. I couldn't save them. But I could save this. I could keep their dream alive. I could make sure Emma grew up knowing she came from people who built something worth keeping." Jacob felt something break open inside him, a wall he'd built over 10 years of running and fighting and surviving. "I know what it's like to lose everything," he said quietly. "To feel like you're alone in the world. I'm glad Emma had you. I'm glad this place had you." "You're not alone anymore," Lily said, and the simple certainty in her voice undid him completely. They left on a Tuesday morning, the herd moving restlessly in the pre-dawn darkness. Emma had cried when they'd left her with Mrs. Torres, and Lily had almost turned back twice, but the older woman had assured them she'd take good care of the child. "You go save that ranch, Mrs. Torres had said firmly. "Emma will be waiting when you get back." The first 2 days of the drive went smoothly. The cattle were range-wise enough to settle into a traveling pattern, and the weather held fair. Jacob and Lily took turns riding point and drag, swapping positions every few hours to share the burden of eating dust. They didn't talk much during the day, too focused on keeping the herd together and moving. But at night, after the cattle had settled and they'd made camp, they would sit by the fire and talk for hours. Jacob told her about his years as a gunslinger, the towns he'd seen, the people he'd met. He edited out the worst of it, the violence and desperation, but gave her enough to understand what kind of life he'd lived. Lily told him about growing up in Greeley, about her father's death in a mining accident when she was 12, about her mother's struggle to keep them fed and clothed. She spoke of meeting Thomas Garrison, of how gentle he'd been despite his injuries, how he'd made her mother laugh again. "He talked about you all the time," she said one night, poking at the fire with a stick. "About how smart you were, how quick with numbers, how you could gentle a horse better than anyone he'd ever seen. He was so proud of you, Jacob, even though I left, especially because you left. He said it took more courage to leave than to stay. He said you sacrificed your own happiness to keep the rest of the family safe, and that was the mark of a true man." Jacob stared into the flames, throat tight. "I wanted to come back so many times. But there was always another rumor of the Dalton gang looking for me, always another reason to stay away one more year." "You're here now," Lily said. "That's what matters." On the 5th day, they hit their first real trouble. A summer storm rolled in fast, turning the sky black and the ground to mud. Lightning spooked the herd, and suddenly 200 head of cattle were running blind through the rain. Jacob and Lily split up, circling the stampeding animals, trying to turn them, to get them running in a circle instead of a straight line. Jacob's horse slipped in the mud, nearly going down, but he managed to keep his seat. Through the driving rain, he could barely see Lily on the other side of the herd, but he could hear her shouting, could see her waving her hat. It took 2 hours to get the herd under control, and by the time they did, both Jacob and Lily were soaked to the bone and shaking with exhaustion. They'd lost at least a dozen head in the chaos, scattered to the winds or broken legs in the muddy terrain. "We can't look for them now," Jacob said, raising his voice over the rain. "We have to keep the main herd together." Lily nodded, water streaming down her face. They pushed the cattle another mile to higher ground, found a spot with enough shelter for a cold camp, and settled in for a miserable night. Jacob had one dry blanket in his saddle roll, saved by the oiled canvas. Without thinking, he wrapped it around Lily's shoulders. "What about you?" She protested. "I'll be fine. You're smaller. You'll catch cold faster. Then we share it." And so they sat huddled together under one blanket, trying to preserve body heat as the storm raged around them. Jacob was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, her shoulder against his chest, her hair brushing his jaw. She smelled like rain and horse and something uniquely her, something that made his heart beat faster. "Jacob," Lily said softly, "are you scared? Of the storm? Of all of it? The drive, the ranch, the future?" He considered lying, then decided she deserved the truth. Terrified, he felt her relax against him slightly. "Good, I thought I was the only one. You hide it well. So do you." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain. Then Lily said, "Thank you for coming back. I know this isn't what you expected. Finding me and Emma instead of your father, having to take on all this responsibility when you've been free for so long. But I'm glad you're here." "So am I," Jacob said, and meant it more than he'd expected. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had never happened. They rounded up what cattle they could find nearby and accepted the loss of the rest. They were down to about 180 head now, but that would still be enough if they made it to Denver. The close call with the stampede seemed to have changed something between them. They rode closer together during the day, called out to each other more often just to check in. At night, they sat nearer to the fire, and their conversations grew more personal. "Did you ever think about getting married?" Lily asked one evening. "Out there on the trail," Jacob shook his head. "What kind of life could I offer a woman? Never staying in one place, always looking over my shoulder, living by the gun. That's no life for a family." "But you wanted one. A family." "Someday, if I ever got the chance to stop running." He looked at her across the fire. "What about you? Any beaux in Greeley?" Lily laughed, but it sounded sad. "The boys my age, they saw me as Thomas Garrison's stepdaughter. They knew I came with responsibilities. A sick father, a small sister. Not many men want to take that on. Then they were fools." The words came out more intensely than Jacob had intended. Lily looked up, her eyes wide in the firelight. "You don't know me well enough to say that," she said quietly. "I know you've worked yourself near to death keeping a ranch running and a child fed. I know you're brave enough to drive cattle across dangerous territory. I know you're loyal and determined and stubborn as hell." Jacob paused. "I know that any man would be lucky to have you." Lily's cheeks flushed pink. "Jacob, I'm just saying what's true." They looked at each other across the fire, and something crackled in the air between them that had nothing to do with burning wood. Then Lily looked away, wrapping her arms around her knees. "We should get some sleep," she said. "Long day tomorrow." But Jacob noticed she smiled as she rolled herself in her blanket, and he caught himself smiling too as he took first watch. The crossing at the South Platte River came on day 9. The water was running high from the recent storms, brown and churning. Jacob rode the length of the bank, looking for the safest crossing point, Lily at his side. There, she pointed to a spot where the bank sloped more gently and the water seemed slightly slower. That's where your father always crossed when he ran drives. Jacob studied it and nodded. Good eye. We'll cross there in the morning when the cattle are rested. But morning brought new complications. A group of riders approached their camp just after dawn, 6 rough-looking men on tired horses. Jacob recognized the type instantly. Drifters, probably looking for easy money. Morning, the leader called out, a scarred man with cold eyes. That's a nice herd you got there. We're not looking for trouble, Jacob said evenly, positioning himself between the men and Lily. No trouble at all, the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We're just offering our services. River crossings can be dangerous. For a small fee, we'd be happy to help you get them across safe. We can manage on our own. You sure about that? Just the 2 of you, one of them being a woman. A lot of things could go wrong. Cattle could scatter, someone could get hurt. Shame if that pretty lady there got swept downstream. It was a thinly veiled threat and everyone knew it. Jacob's hand drifted to his gun. I said we can manage. The scarred man's eyes hardened. Now see, I don't think you're hearing me right. We're going to help you with this crossing one way or another. Either you pay us for our assistance, or we'll just help ourselves to a few head as payment. Your choice. Jacob was calculating odds. 6 against 2, but 6 men who probably couldn't shoot worth a damn against a gunslinger who'd survived 10 years on the frontier. Still, if shooting started, Lily could get hurt. The cattle could stampede again. They could lose everything. How much? Lily's voice cut through the tension. Lily, no, Jacob started, but she ignored him. How much for your help crossing? She repeated, looking at the scarred man. 20 head. That's robbery, Jacob said flatly. That's business. The man shrugged. Take it or leave it. 5 head, Lily countered. And only after we're safely across. The scarred man considered this. 10 head. 5 now, 5 after. 7 total, all after we cross, and you help us round up any that scatter. Jacob wanted to intervene, but he recognized the calculation Lily was making. 7 head was a significant loss, but it was better than a shootout that could cost them everything. The scarred man nodded slowly. Deal, but any tricks and the price goes up. It stuck in Jacob's craw to accept help from men who were essentially extorting them, but Lily had made the smart play. With the extra riders, they got the herd across the river in under 3 hours with minimal losses. True to her negotiation, Lily counted out 7 head from the back of the group, all smaller animals that would bring less at market anyway. Pleasure doing business, the scarred man said with a mock tip of his hat. Then he and his men drove their payment away, leaving Jacob and Lily with the rest of the herd on the far bank. I'm sorry, Lily said once they were alone. I know you wanted to send them packing, but you made the right call, Jacob interrupted. I was letting pride cloud my judgment. You kept your head and got us out of there without bloodshed. Lily looked relieved. I was worried you'd be angry that I spoke up. Angry. Lily, you probably saved our lives back there. I'm grateful. He paused. You've got good instincts, better than mine sometimes. She smiled at that, and Jacob found himself thinking that he liked making her smile, liked the way her whole face lit up when she was happy. They made good time over the next few days, and Jacob noticed he'd started thinking of them as a team, a partnership. Lily would spot a gap in the herd and he'd be moving to fill it before she even called out. He'd notice her canteen running low and have his own ready to share before she asked. They moved together like dancers who'd been practicing the same routine for years, not 2 people who'd met less than 2 weeks ago. At night, their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Jacob found himself telling her things he'd never spoken aloud, about the nightmares that still woke him, about the men he'd killed in self-defense, and how their faces haunted him. Lily listened without judgment, sometimes offering comfort, sometimes just sitting in understanding silence. In turn, she told him about the fear she'd lived with these past 6 months, the terror that she'd fail, that she'd lose the ranch and leave Emma with nothing. She spoke of nights crying herself to sleep from exhaustion and worry, of meals skipped so Emma could eat, of prayers that seemed to go unanswered. "But they weren't unanswered," she said one night. "You came. Maybe later than I hoped, but you came. That was the answer. I wish I'd come sooner." "You came when you were meant to." Lily looked at him seriously. "Everything that happened, all the struggles, maybe they were necessary. Maybe I needed to learn I could stand on my own. Maybe you needed to finish your business out there. Maybe we both needed to become the people we are now before we could save this ranch together." Jacob wanted to tell her that somewhere along the way, the ranch had stopped being the only thing he wanted to save. That he'd started to think about futures that included her, not just as Emma's guardian or the ranch's caretaker, but as something more. But the words stuck in his throat, too big and too scary to voice. On the 14th day, they spotted Denver in the distance. Jacob felt a rush of relief and pride. They'd made it. Against all odds, they'd gotten the herd to market. The stockyards were busy, full of other ranchers selling off their herds before winter. Jacob and Lily penned their cattle and sought out the buyers, sitting through tense negotiations about price per head and delivery terms. In the end, they got a fair price, better than Jacob had hoped for their late season, smaller herd. After expenses and setting aside money for the drive back, they had enough to pay off the mortgage with a little left over for supplies and operating costs. That night, in a modest hotel in Denver, the first real beds they'd slept in since leaving the ranch, Jacob lay awake thinking about the woman in the room next door. Over 2 weeks of constant companionship, of shared struggles and small triumphs, and he couldn't imagine going back to a life without her in it. But what could he offer her? He was a former gunslinger with a checkered past, 10 years older than her, carrying baggage she deserved better than. She had her whole life ahead of her. Once Emma was grown, Lily could leave the ranch, find a nice young man to settle down with, have the kind of normal life she'd never had a chance at. The thought of her leaving, of the ranch without her laugh or her strength or her presence, felt like a knife to the gut. The next morning, Lily met him for breakfast with an odd expression on her face. "What is it?" Jacob asked. "I've been thinking," she said slowly. "About what happens when we get back." Jacob's heart sank. Here it came. She'd done her duty, helped save the ranch, and now she wanted out. He couldn't blame her. "Go on," he managed. "The ranch is yours now, legally. Your father left it to you. I'm just Emma's guardian until she comes of age." Lily twisted her napkin in her hands. "I want you to know that I don't expect anything. You've been more than generous. Once we get back, if you want to run the ranch yourself, Emma and I can find somewhere else to live. I've saved a little money from the sewing, enough to get us started in town maybe." "What?" Jacob stared at her. "Lily, that ranch is your home." "It's your home," she corrected gently. "I was just keeping it warm for you." "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." Jacob leaned forward. "Lily, without you, that ranch would have been lost. You kept it alive. You earned your place there 100 times over." "But legally, I don't give a damn," Jacob interrupted. "That ranch needs you. Emma needs you." He paused, his heart pounding. "I need you." Lily's eyes widened. "Jacob, these past 2 weeks," he continued, the words tumbling out now that he'd started, "they've been the best of my life. Not despite the hardship, but because of who I was facing it with. You're the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever met. The thought of you leaving, of not seeing you every day, it's unbearable." You don't mean that, Lily whispered, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I've never meant anything more. Jacob reached across the table and took her hand. I know I don't deserve you. I know I'm too old, too damaged, that my past is full of things you should run from. But if you'll have me, if you'll stay, I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. A tear spilled down Lily's cheek. You think you're the one who doesn't deserve this. Jacob, I'm just a seamstress. I have no money, no family except Emma. I came with nothing and I've given you nothing but problems and complications. You gave me a home, Jacob said fiercely. You gave me a sister I never knew I had. You gave me purpose and hope and a reason to believe in tomorrow. How can you call that nothing? Lily laughed through her tears. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both convinced we're not good enough for the other. Then maybe we're perfectly matched. Jacob squeezed her hand. Stay, Lily, not as Emma's guardian or the ranch keeper. Stay as my partner. In all things. Are you asking me to marry you, Jacob Garrison? The question hung in the air between them. Jacob realized that, yes, that was exactly what he was asking, even though he'd never planned it, never rehearsed the words. Yes, he said simply. I am. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a short time, but I also know that what I feel for you is real. I love you, Lily Jensen. Will you marry me? Lily was crying openly now, but she was also smiling. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. I love you too, Jacob. I think I started falling for you that first day, when you could have thrown us out but instead chose to understand, to help, to stay. Jacob stood and pulled her into his arms, right there in the hotel dining room, not caring who saw. He kissed her, and it felt like coming home after a much longer journey than 10 years, like finding something he hadn't known he'd been searching for. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Lily laughed. We should probably tell Emma she's getting a brother for real now. She'll have a proper family, Jacob agreed. Mother and father and all. Speaking of which, Lily said, suddenly shy. I know it's traditional to wait, but given that we'll be living under the same roof already, maybe we could get married here in Denver. Before we go back, Jacob grinned. Lily Jensen, are you suggesting we elope? I'm suggesting we start our life together as soon as possible. Is that so terrible? That's the best idea I've heard all day. They were married that afternoon by a justice of the peace, with 2 hotel clerks serving as witnesses. Lily wore the best dress she'd brought, a simple blue calico that brought out her eyes. Jacob bought her a small gold band from a jeweler near the courthouse, nothing fancy but solid and real. When the justice pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed her again, and this time it was a promise, a vow more binding than any word spoken. They spent their wedding night in the hotel, and Jacob discovered that Lily was even more remarkable than he'd imagined. She was curious and passionate, unafraid to show what she wanted, to ask for what she needed. They talked and laughed and made love and talked some more, learning each other's bodies and hearts in equal measure. I never imagined this, Lily said, lying in Jacob's arms as dawn light crept through the curtains. When you rode up that day, I was terrified. I thought you'd be angry, that you'd throw us out. I never dreamed we'd end up here. Life's funny that way, Jacob said, running his fingers through her hair. All those years I was running from something. Turns out I should have been running toward something, toward you. You found me anyway. Luckiest day of my life. They lingered in Denver one more day, handling the final paperwork for the cattle sale and buying supplies for the journey home. Jacob bought gifts for Emma, a doll and a picture book. Lily bought fabric to make new curtains for the ranch house. Our ranch house now, Jacob corrected when she mentioned it. Our ranch house, Lily agreed with a smile that made his heart skip. The journey back to Greeley took 8 days, and they were the happiest 8 days Jacob could remember. They talked about their plans for the ranch, about expanding the herd, maybe breeding horses as well. They talked about Emma's education, about hiring help in the busy seasons, about the future they were building together. They also simply enjoyed each other's company. Jacob found himself laughing more than he had in years. Lily had a wry sense of humor and a knack for finding joy in small things: a pretty sunset, a bird's song, the first stars appearing in the evening sky. "You make everything better," Jacob told her one night as they lay under the stars. "You make me brave," Lily replied. "I've been scared for so long, trying to hold everything together alone, but with you I feel like I can face anything." "We can face anything," Jacob corrected. "Together." When they finally rode into Greeley, dusty and tired but triumphant, Emma came running from Mrs. Torres's house, shrieking with joy. Lily dismounted and caught her sister up in a fierce hug. "You came back," Emma squealed. "Mrs. Torres said you would, but I was scared." "I'll always come back to you," Lily promised. "Always." Emma noticed Jacob then and regarded him with the same shy curiosity as before. "Did you save the ranch?" "We did," Jacob confirmed. "Your sister and I, we saved it together." "Does that mean we can stay? We don't have to leave our home?" "You'll never have to leave," Jacob said. "This is your home, Emma, for as long as you want it to be." The little girl seemed to think about this, then looked between Jacob and Lily. "Are you going to stay too?" "Yes, I am." "Good," Emma nodded decisively. "Lily's been sad without you here." "She cries at night sometimes." Lily flushed. "Emma, but she seems happy now," Emma continued. "Did you make her happy?" Jacob met Lily's eyes over Emma's head. "I'm certainly going to try." Mrs. Torres invited them in for a meal and to hear about their journey. When they mentioned they'd gotten married, the old woman clapped her hands in delight. "I knew it," she exclaimed. "The moment I heard Thomas Garrison's son was coming home, I said to myself, those two will be perfect for each other." "You couldn't have known that," Lily protested. "You'd never met Jacob." "Didn't need to meet him," Mrs. Torres said with a knowing smile. "I knew you, dear girl, knew what you needed. And I knew his father, knew what stock he came from. Some things are just meant to be." That night back at the ranch, Jacob carried Emma to bed while Lily lit lamps throughout the house. It felt different now, walking through these rooms. Before, it had been the home he'd lost. Now it was the home he was building, with a wife he loved and a sister he was getting to know. After Emma was asleep, Jacob found Lily on the porch, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "How strange life is," she said, leaning back against him. "6 months ago, I was alone and terrified. Now I'm married to a man I love, the ranch is saved, and Emma has a real family again." "It is strange," Jacob agreed, "but I'll take this strange over any other life I can imagine." They stood there together, watching the first stars appear, and Jacob felt a peace he'd never known. For 10 years he'd been running, searching, surviving. And all along, home had been waiting for him here, in the form of a woman he'd never met and a life he'd never imagined. The next weeks fell into a rhythm. Jacob and Lily worked the ranch together, repairing fences, tending the remaining cattle, planning for next season. Jacob taught Emma to ride on the old mare, delighting in her squeals of joy. Lily continued her sewing work, but now it was for extra money, not survival. They went to the bank together and paid off the mortgage, Jacob savoring the look on the banker's face when they handed over the full amount. The man had clearly expected to foreclose, to profit from their struggle. Instead, he had to watch them walk out with a clear deed. "How does it feel?" Lily asked as they left the bank. "Like we can breathe again," Jacob said. "Like we can build instead of just survive." They began making improvements to the ranch. Jacob used some of their remaining money to hire a few ranch hands for the heavy work. Lily planted a larger garden, planning to preserve food for winter. Together they painted the house, replaced worn boards, made the place shine like it hadn't in years. Neighbors who'd written off the Garrison Ranch as a lost cause started stopping by again, impressed by the transformation. Some offered to buy cattle. Others wanted to trade work or supplies. The ranch was becoming part of the community again, not just a sad reminder of what had been lost. Jacob found himself settling into this life with surprising ease. After 10 years of constant movement, of sleeping with one eye open and his hand on his gun, it felt strange at first to stay in one place. But every morning he woke up next to Lily. Every evening he sat down to supper with his wife and sister. He felt the restlessness fade a little more. "You miss it?" Lily asked him one night. "The traveling, the freedom?" Jacob considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it. When your whole life fits in a saddle bag, there's a certain clarity. But no, I don't miss the loneliness. I don't miss looking over my shoulder. I don't miss waking up in strange places with no one who cared if I lived or died." "I care," Lily said softly. "Very much. I know. That's the difference." Jacob pulled her closer. "I'd trade all the freedom in the world for this. For you, for Emma, for a place to belong." As autumn painted the mountains gold and red, they received word that the Greeley annual harvest festival was coming up. Emma was beside herself with excitement, talking endlessly about the games and contests and dancing. "We should go," Lily said. "All three of us as a family." "I'm not much for dancing," Jacob warned. "Then you'll learn," Lily said with a mischievous smile. "I'll teach you." And she did, clearing space in the parlor and humming waltzes while she showed him the steps. Jacob felt clumsy and foolish at first, but Lily was patient, and eventually he got the hang of it. Or at least he got good enough that he didn't step on her toes more than occasionally. "See," Lily said, breathless and laughing as they spun around the room. "You're a natural. I have a good teacher." Emma watched from her seat by the fireplace, clapping along to the rhythm. "You look beautiful together," she announced. "Thank you, sweetheart," Lily said. "When I grow up, I want to marry someone who looks at me the way Jacob looks at you." Jacob and Lily exchanged glances, touched by the child's observation. "When you grow up," Jacob said, "you should marry someone who makes you as happy as Lily makes me." The festival was everything Emma had hoped for. They arrived early, the wagon loaded with Lily's preserves to sell, and a quilt she'd spent weeks making. The town square was decorated with autumn leaves and corn stalks, and the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread filled the air. Emma ran from booth to booth, marveling at everything. Jacob bought her a ribbon for her hair and a piece of honeycomb candy. Lily entered her preserves in the competition and won second place, beaming with pride. When the dancing started, Jacob kept his promise and led Lily onto the floor. They weren't the most graceful couple there, but they were certainly the happiest. Jacob held his wife close and moved to the music, aware of the approving looks from the townspeople. These were the people who'd watched Lily struggle alone for months. They'd seen her keep the ranch running through sheer determination. Now they were seeing her happy, seeing the Garrison Ranch restored, and their approval was written on their faces. "They're glad for us," Lily murmured, noticing the looks too. "They should be. You're the town hero, keeping that place going all alone." "Not alone anymore." "Never alone anymore," Jacob agreed. As the evening wore on, several of the older ranchers approached Jacob, welcoming him back, offering condolences for his father's death. One of them, a grizzled man named Henderson who Lily had mentioned helped with fences, clapped Jacob on the shoulder. "Your father was a good man," Henderson said. "He'd be proud of what you and your wife have done with the place, and he'd be especially proud that you married this one. She's got more grit than half the men in this territory." "Don't I know it?" Jacob said, finding Lily in the crowd with his eyes. She was helping Emma with a game, laughing at something the child said. His chest tightened with love so strong it almost hurt. When they finally headed home, Emma fell asleep in the back of the wagon, exhausted from excitement. Jacob drove with one arm around Lily, who leaned against his shoulder. "Thank you for today," she said quietly. "For what? I should be thanking you. You made all of this possible. For giving me a family again. For making Emma's life stable and happy. For loving me." "Easiest thing I've ever done," Jacob said truthfully. Winter came to Colorado with the first snow in early November. Jacob and the hired hands worked to get the cattle ready, ensuring they'd have enough fodder and shelter to make it through the cold months. Lily spent her days preparing the house, sealing drafts, organizing the food stores, making sure they'd be comfortable. Emma started school in town, riding in with Jacob twice a week when he went for supplies. She was bright and eager, soaking up learning like a sponge. Her teacher sent home glowing reports, and both Jacob and Lily took fierce pride in her accomplishments. "She's so smart," Lily said one evening, reading over Emma's arithmetic slate. "She gets that from your father. He was always good with numbers. And she gets her kindness from you," Jacob said. "I've seen how she is with the other children, always making sure no one's left out." The winter was hard but not unbearable. There were long evenings by the fire, the three of them together, reading or playing games or just talking. Jacob taught Emma to play chess using a set he'd bought in Denver. Lily taught them both to knit, though Jacob's attempts resulted in more laughter than actual scarves. On Christmas morning, they exchanged simple gifts. Jacob had carved a wooden horse for Emma and a jewelry box for Lily. Lily had made him a new shirt, perfectly fitted and beautifully embroidered. Emma had drawn pictures for both of them, carefully colored scenes of their family and the ranch. "Best Christmas I've ever had," Jacob said, looking around at his family, at the warm house, at the life they'd built. "First of many," Lily said, kissing his cheek. As winter gave way to spring, Lily started feeling ill in the mornings. At first she blamed it on something she ate, but when it continued for weeks, Jacob insisted on taking her to see the doctor in town. Dr. Morrison examined her and emerged from his office with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Garrison, you're going to be a father." Jacob's world tilted. A baby. They were going to have a baby. Lily came out of the examination room, her eyes shining with tears. "Did he tell you?" "He told me." Jacob pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed with joy and terror in equal measure. "How do you feel? Are you happy?" "I'm terrified and thrilled and so happy," Lily said, laughing through her tears. "We're going to have a baby, Jacob." "We're going to have a baby," he repeated, the reality sinking in. Emma was ecstatic when they told her. "I'm going to be a big sister, like Lily is to me." "Exactly like that," Lily confirmed. "You'll have to help us take care of the baby." "I will. I'll be the best big sister ever." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Jacob found himself both more protective and more in awe of Lily than ever. She continued working the ranch as much as she could, stubborn and determined even as her belly grew. "You need to rest," Jacob would say, finding her mending fences or tending the garden. "I need to keep busy," Lily would counter. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." But she did slow down as the summer heat intensified, spending more time in the house, sewing baby clothes and preparing the nursery. Jacob converted the small room off their bedroom, painting it and building a cradle from pine wood. "It's beautiful," Lily said, running her hand over the smooth wood. "Our baby will be so loved." "Loved and protected," Jacob promised. "I'll make sure of that." The baby came on a sweltering August night, almost exactly a year after Jacob had ridden back into Greeley. Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Torres attended the birth while Jacob paced the porch, Emma sleeping on the settee inside, unaware of the drama unfolding. It seemed to take forever, the sounds from the bedroom making Jacob's heart race with fear. But finally he heard it, the thin, angry wail of a newborn. Mrs. Torres appeared on the porch, beaming. "You have a son, Jacob, a healthy baby boy, and Lily is fine, tired but fine." Jacob rushed inside to find Lily propped up in bed, exhausted and radiant, holding a tiny bundle. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Meet your son," she whispered. Jacob approached slowly, reverently. The baby was tiny, red-faced and squalling, but perfect. Absolutely perfect. When Lily placed him in Jacob's arms, the world shifted on its axis. "Hey there, little one," Jacob murmured. "Welcome to the world." The baby quieted at the sound of his voice, dark blue eyes trying to focus. Jacob felt his own eyes fill with tears. This was his son, his child. A piece of himself and Lily, a future made flesh. "What should we name him?" Lily asked softly. Jacob had been thinking about this for months. "Thomas," he said, "after my father, if that's all right with you." Lily smiled. "Thomas Garrison, it's perfect." Emma woke shortly after and tiptoed into the room, eyes wide with wonder. "Is that the baby?" "This is your nephew, Thomas," Lily said. "Do you want to hold him?" With careful supervision, they let Emma hold her nephew, her face a picture of concentration and delight. "He's so small," she breathed. "I'll protect him always." "I know you will," Jacob said, his heart full to bursting. The next months were a blur of sleepless nights and early mornings, of learning to care for an infant while maintaining the ranch. It was exhausting and overwhelming and absolutely wonderful. Jacob discovered a capacity for love he hadn't known he possessed, split between his wife, his sister, and now his son. Lily proved to be a natural mother, patient and nurturing but also practical. She managed to care for Thomas, help with the ranch, and still find time to teach Emma her lessons and share quiet moments with Jacob. "How do you do it all?" Jacob asked her one evening, watching her rock Thomas to sleep while helping Emma with her reading. "I don't do it alone," Lily said simply. "I have you." As Thomas's first birthday approached, they decided to host a celebration. The ranch house was filled with neighbors and friends, all cooing over the baby and marveling at how much the Garrison Ranch had flourished in just 2 years. Jacob stood on the porch, watching the celebration, his son in his arms. Lily came to stand beside him, and Emma joined them, the 4 of them looking out over the land that had brought them together. "You ever think about that day?" Lily asked quietly. "When you first rode up and saw the dresses on the clothesline?" "All the time," Jacob admitted. "I was so confused, so lost. I thought I was coming home to one life and found something completely different. Disappointed. Blessed," Jacob corrected. "I thought I was coming home to the past. Instead, I found my future." Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Tell me the story again, about how you and Lily fell in love," Jacob laughed. "You've heard it 100 times. I like it. It's romantic." So Jacob told the story again, about the dresses on the clothesline and the young woman who'd kept his father's dream alive, about a cattle drive and a river crossing, and 2 people who found each other when they both needed it most. Thomas fell asleep in his arms as he talked, and Emma leaned against Lily, listening with rapt attention even though she knew every word. Inside, their friends laughed and celebrated, but out here on the porch, it was just the 4 of them, a family built from loss and determination and love. "And they lived happily ever after," Emma prompted, knowing her part in the story. "They did," Jacob confirmed, looking at Lily. "They really did." As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jacob Garrison held his son and stood with his wife and sister, surrounded by the land his family had worked for generations, and knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The ranch thrived over the next few years. With Jacob's experience and Lily's careful management, they expanded the herd, added horses like they'd planned, and became one of the most successful operations in the region. But more than that, they built a life rich with love and laughter. Emma grew into a confident young woman, excelling at school and helping with her nephew. Thomas became a bright, curious toddler, following his father around the ranch and trying to help with everything. And Jacob and Lily's love only deepened with time, growing stronger with each challenge they faced together. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jacob took Lily back to the spot where he'd first seen those dresses on the clothesline, the moment that had changed his life forever. "Do you remember what I thought when I saw them?" he asked, holding her close. "You thought someone had invaded your home. I thought my life was over, that everything I'd known was gone." Jacob kissed her forehead. "I was right, in a way, that life was over. But this life with you, it's so much better than anything I could have imagined." "Jacob Garrison, are you getting sentimental on me?" "Maybe I am." "Is that so bad?" "Not bad at all," Lily said, reaching up to kiss him properly. "I love you, you know, more every day." "I love you too. Thank you for being stubborn enough to wait for me, for being strong enough to save this place, for being brave enough to take a chance on a broken-down gunslinger." "You were never broken," Lily said firmly. "Just lost. And now you're found." They stood there together, watching Thomas chase butterflies in the field while Emma read under a tree, and Jacob knew that every hard year, every gunfight, every lonely night on the trail had been worth it to arrive at this moment, this life, this love. The dresses on the clothesline that had once confused and frightened him now represented everything he held dear. A home filled with the presence of the women he loved, a family that had grown from tragedy and determination, a future bright with promise. Jacob Garrison had ridden home after 10 years expecting to find his past. Instead, he'd found his future, his purpose, his heart. And he'd spend the rest of his life grateful for the day he'd seen those dresses dancing in the Colorado wind and had the courage to step through the door and meet the woman who would change everything. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. When Emma turned 18, she enrolled in the teaching college in Denver, determined to become an educator. Jacob and Lily were proud beyond measure, watching her ride away to pursue her dreams while knowing she'd always have a home to return to. Thomas grew into a strong, capable boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did. At 7 years old, he could already ride better than most men and had a natural way with animals that reminded Jacob of his own youth. And then, on a crisp autumn morning when Thomas was 8, Lily gave Jacob the news that they were expecting again. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, arrived the following summer, completing their family in ways they hadn't even known were missing. Rose had Lily's green eyes and Jacob's dark hair, and from the moment she entered the world, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Jacob, who had once made his living with a gun, now spent his evenings playing tea party and braiding his daughter's hair, and wouldn't have traded it for anything. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming a legacy Jacob and Lily would pass down to their children. But more than land or cattle or money, what they built was a family rooted in love, strengthened by adversity, and bound together by the choices they'd made that first day when a weary gunslinger came home and found something better than he'd ever dreamed. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch was peaceful under the stars, Jacob and Lily would sit on the porch, hands clasped, and remember how it all began. They'd talk about the cattle drive, about the river crossing, about the moment they'd first realized they were falling in love. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked one such night. "Taking a chance on me. You could have had an easier life with someone else." "Easier, maybe," Lily said, squeezing his hand. "But not better, never better. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. You gave me a love I didn't even know existed. How could I regret that?" "I thought I knew what love was," Jacob confessed. "But what I feel for you, for our children, for this life we've built, it's beyond anything I imagined possible." "Then we're both lucky," Lily said, resting her head on his shoulder. "We found each other when we needed it most, and we built something beautiful. And it was beautiful." The ranch that had nearly been lost was now thriving. The family that had been broken was now whole. The gunslinger who'd spent 10 years running had finally found a reason to stay. And the young woman who'd fought so hard to preserve a dream had found her own dreams coming true in ways she'd never expected. Emma returned from teaching college, engaged to a kind young man who taught mathematics, and they married in a ceremony at the ranch, surrounded by family and friends. She eventually took a teaching position in Greeley, staying close to the family she loved. Thomas grew into a fine young man who ran the ranch alongside his father, learning the business and developing his own ideas for expansion. He was patient and hardworking, with his mother's head for numbers and his father's instinct for the land. Rose, spirited and clever, showed an early talent for drawing and spent hours sketching the mountains, the horses, the life around her. Both Jacob and Lily encouraged her artistic pursuits, determined that their children would have opportunities to follow their passions. As Jacob approached his 50th birthday, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. From a frightened young man who'd fled his home to protect his family, to a hardened gunslinger trying to outrun his past, to a husband and father who'd found peace in the very place he'd left behind. "What are you thinking about?" Lily asked, joining him on the porch. She was 40 now, still beautiful, with silver threads in her golden hair and laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of a life well lived. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am," Jacob said, pulling her into his arms. "For you, for our children, for this life. I'm thinking about how close I came to missing all of it." "But you didn't miss it," Lily reminded him. "You came home. You took a chance. You opened your heart to possibilities you couldn't have predicted." "Because you showed me how," Jacob said. "Your courage, your strength, your refusal to give up, it inspired me. You made me believe in second chances." "We gave each other second chances," Lily corrected. "I was drowning when you arrived, trying to hold everything together and failing. You saved me as much as I saved you." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they'd nurtured together for so many years. The same mountains that had witnessed Jacob's return now watched over his family, constant and eternal. Inside the house, they could hear Thomas and Rose arguing good-naturedly about something, their voices carrying through the open windows. It was the sound of family, of life, of the legacy Jacob and Lily had built together. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Lily asked. "After I told you about your father and Emma and everything that had happened. I said a lot of things that night. My head was spinning. You said thank you, for staying, for taking care of Emma, for trying to save the place." Lily looked up at him, her green eyes still as captivating as the first day he'd seen them. "But Jacob, you were the one who saved it. You were the answer to prayers I didn't even know how to pray." "Then we saved each other," Jacob said, kissing her forehead. "And we built something neither of us could have built alone." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jacob thought about the dresses on the clothesline that had greeted him that fateful day. They'd represented so much: Confusion and change, loss and possibility, the end of one life and the beginning of another. He'd frozen when he'd seen them, paralyzed by the implications of what they meant. But then he'd done the bravest thing he'd ever done, braver than facing down the Dalton gang, braver than 10 years as a gunslinger, braver than the long ride home. He'd walked through the door. He'd opened himself to whatever came next, and what came next was love. Real, deep, lasting love with a woman who'd proven herself his equal in every way. What came next was family, not just biological ties but chosen bonds, people who decided to be there for each other no matter what. What came next was home, not just a physical place but a sense of belonging, of purpose, of peace. The ranch would continue for generations, Jacob hoped. Thomas would take it over one day, and maybe his children after him. But the real legacy wasn't the land or the cattle or even the Garrison name. The real legacy was the love they'd built here, the family they'd created from broken pieces, the proof that second chances were possible if you were brave enough to take them. "I love you, Lily Garrison," Jacob said, holding his wife close. "More than I have words to express." "I love you too," Lily replied. "Thank you for coming home. Thank you for seeing past the dresses on the clothesline to the life we could build together. Best decision I ever made." They stayed there on the porch until full dark, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they'd built. Inside, their children called for them, wanting to say goodnight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to cherish. But for now, in this perfect moment, Jacob and Lily simply held each other and gave thanks for the journey that had brought them here, for the love that sustained them, for the family that completed them, for the home they'd fought so hard to save and had turned into something more precious than either could have imagined. The gunslinger had ridden home after 10 years and frozen at the sight of dresses on his clothesline. But he hadn't turned away. He'd stepped forward into the unknown, and in doing so, he'd found everything he'd ever needed, everything he'd ever wanted, everything that made life worth living. And they lived, truly and completely and joyfully, happily ever after.